Hello everyone. So we've got, I think tonight's going to be the night with like 0 slides, which usually we have like 500 slides for all these presentations. My name is Timothy Jacobs. I am a developer at iThemes. I mainly work on the iThemes security project. But I'm not talking about any about that today, though we'll probably have time for questions at the end. So if you have questions about WordPress security stuff, I'll be happy to answer those. But what we're mainly going to be looking at today is what's upcoming in the next release of WordPress, which is WordPress 5.2. Right now, that's a release that is scheduled to come out at the end of this month, so in just a couple of weeks. And we're going to take a look at a couple of different things. We're going to go through demos of some of the new features. We're going to take a look at Gutenberg. We're going to take a look at a couple of new components called Site Health, and another thing called Serve Happy, and its relation to the dreaded white screen of death. And we're going to take a look about how WordPress 5.2 makes that easier. We're also going to be taking a look at the PHP bumps that are happening in WordPress. So this is going to be the first release in WordPress to bump the PHP version in like years. We're going to take a brief look at what that means for your website. And I'm going to try and get you to install the release candidate of this version and tell you how you can test it on your own website, and report bugs, things like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is Gutenberg. Gutenberg has been in development, now we've had it for 2 releases since WordPress 5.0, since December. And so the team, they've been working hard on it, making a lot of improvements, a lot of changes. In this release, there are something like hundreds of bug fixes that have been filed and resolved in this version. There have been massive performance increases. And there's been a couple of minor features that are coming in this release that are setting the pathway for the next couple of releases in WordPress. We're going to take a look at a couple of the changes that are available here. The first one is there's been one of my favorite blocks in Gutenberg is this cover block. And so this lets you put at the top of your page like a giant image that says like, here's this image with text on it. And until now, you could really only have that text. But something that's cool in 5.2 is they've made this whole thing a little more advanced. One of the things that is cool about Gutenberg is how you can nest blocks together. And so what's new in this version is that you can actually, here I'm just editing the text, and I can make this whatever I want it to say. But now I can also add in new blocks. So I can add here, there's only a very few amount that I can actually add to this block, because you don't want to put an image in here and a YouTube video on top of this thing. So WordPress limits you a bit to what they think will look good. And so one of the options that they give you is another heading. You can put in paragraphs of text. So you could say, this is my post about a bakery I checked out. And then you can add one more type of block here, which is just a button block. And so you can create a button with links to wherever you want, position it, et cetera, basic Gutenberg stuff. But all of this wasn't possible before WordPress 5.2, and it's possible now. Another cool thing is when you select background images. I know that there's oftentimes when you're working on a client website and you have an image that has to fit in this area, and the client's like, well, I upload this image and I can't get it to display how I want. I want the thing that's on the top or the thing that's on the bottom, the thing on the left and the right, and you try and teach them that, hey, open up this image in Preview or Photoshop or something, crop it to fit perfectly, but that's not a great experience for clients, and they're not going to do it anyways. So one of the things that's cool in 5.2 is that they've added a focal picker. So you can select where you want which part of the photo to appear, and you can do it entirely visually, which I think is pretty cool.
Can I ask?
Yeah?
They don't have that for regular media library images, do they?
Let's find out. That's a good question. I have a feeling that it would only be something that's like constrained to a given width. Yeah, I think so. So like because this is just displaying the full image size here, it's not going to
But you could just
show you
choose
that.
any size right there. From large to something else and it crop it.
I don't think so. Like I am fairly certain like what it's doing here is it's just choosing whatever dimensions that you want. The difference with the cover image is that there's a max height. So if there's no max height, instead, you need to pick something to show in that image. But in the cover block, since it's only like 200 pixels or 300 pixels, you need to be able to choose a focal point. But all these other things aren't going to crop.
Probably background image as opposed
Exactly, exactly. That being said, one of the cool things about how Gutenberg is being developed is that components like this focal image picker, this is something that other developers can use and they can add to blocks. So I would actually be surprised to not see a custom block or an extension to the image block in 5.2 that uses this focal picker to be able to do something like that. I would be shocked if that's not available.
When you choose a different ratio for an image size, it's always a huge problem.
Yeah.
WordPress has to figure out how to crop it. You could just say crop from the top, from the left, right, top, bottom, but it's hard to.
Yeah, exactly. You can specify that, when you register that image size, how you want it to crop. But yeah, this could be a way to do that forward in a smarter way so that you don't have to just specify top left, top middle, top center, etc. But I don't think there's a way to do that now, unless I'm completely missing something.
The media library has not been updated in a long time.
No.
And it's built a backbone, which most people don't know and
Yeah.
learn. So it's just better to build it in React.
Yeah, it's the much better path forward for those kind of things. Because you could take this into the backbone media editor and then crop it there, but that's also not ideal, kind of for the same reasons. It's kind of hectic for clients to understand. Another of the big things that's going into Gutenberg now and has been working on for like a couple of months people have been doing is converting all of the legacy widgets in WordPress over to blocks. So these are things like the calendar widget, let's get all of them, the archives widget, all of these different things, showing the latest comments, searching, the calendar of posts, a bunch of things that you'll see whenever you install a new website, but you're probably never going to use again. One of the things that the Gutenberg team has been doing is they've been building blocks for all of these. So all of these are different blocks. Some of them are customizable. So we've had latest posts for a while and latest comments, but now we have things like search. And so you can change like the placeholder here, some very basic stuff. I don't think that this is probably something that you're going to use all the time in your posts. I don't know when you would include a calendar just in your post or your page. But what's exciting here and what this is being developed for is that the next phase, the phase 2, quote unquote, of Gutenberg, is going to be taking the content editing experience that you use when you're editing pages to different aspects of your site. And one of those is sidebars. And so in the future, when you edit your sidebar, you're not going to have the legacy widgets anymore. So this is step 1 in porting these over to blocks so that they can use Gutenberg for that new site editing interface. It's not there yet, so this is really just a very simple preview. One of the things that I could really only find that was really useful of these kind of widget things, perhaps in a post, is I've set up here a latest recipes block. And this is set up using a container block from another plugin, and then the basic RSS feed block in WordPress. And so I've made it a reusable block so that I can put in different places. But so this is just pulling an RSS feed, and that was a widget before, but I think it's one of the few things that probably makes sense in a post context. And you can do that pretty easily. If we go over into Manage Blocks, you can see how I've set this up. It's just a basic, the RSS block, and I just paste in a link to any RSS feed. You get a little basic customizable stuff. Or saying, hey, these are the latest recipes, and I could insert this in any post anywhere. And so I think that's one of the few of these things that from 5.2, the widgets to blocks conversion, that might make sense for your site. But I don't know. It's really a step 1 in terms of like seeing maybe 6 months from now we'll have something that's cooler to do.
The bottom half of that, the list is driven by something that says, show me the last 5, rather than paste, copy, paste.
Exactly. So this is the RSS. I'll show you how you could like set this up. Another one is I'm just creating an RSS block. I'm doing this with the quick selection thing where you can type / and then keep typing, and it makes it really easy if you're a keyboard user to find what you want. But you could also use the plus button and search for RSS. And then I'm pasting in a feed URL here to an RSS feed. So I'm not doing it manually. I'm just doing that, and then this is entirely generated by WordPress. So I'm saying 5, but I could change this to 3, and it refreshes. Change it to 9. I can hide the author, and it won't show there anymore. The date, etc. I can even change it into a kind of block view, which isn't super helpful, but it's a thing. Another thing is some enhancements to the table block. Let me pull this up. I just created a basic WordPress table block, and what's new in here is that now you can set up a striped version, and you can set up striped version with custom background colors. So you can change it how you want. You don't have to dive into HTML or custom CSS. You can just pick the color that you want, and it'll just do it for you. That's, believe it or not, that's most of the changes to Gutenberg in 5.2, except for one kind of, depending on how you ask, is a big thing or a small thing. WordPress 5.2 introduces a block manager. And so what's happening right now is there are tons of plugins out there that add like 25 different blocks to your WordPress site. And so if you go here and you actually want to manually find a block right now, and we click the add button, we have like a, oh Jesus. Let's click the add button. We have like a giant list with all of these different things, and they're all being added to by all of these different plugins. And each of them have their own way to select which blocks you want. If you go into embeds, it's even crazier. There's like 20 or 30 different embeds or something. But what WordPress 5.2 has added is a kind of simple block manager. And so this lets you disable blocks from appearing here. And if we uncheck these, they won't appear when you go to add new blocks, things like this. The unfortunate thing here is that this is still really primitive. So you can deselect these blocks and they won't show up, but your client, they can go back in there and they can turn those all back on. So it's not a great control for clients. It's like, well, you can make the default experience a bit simpler, but they still have the power to go in and change everything. So you can say, hey, please don't do that, but there's no way to enforce it yet.
You can promote programmatically with a filter, right?
Yeah, you would have to do programming to do it. Out of the box, there's not like a default role control. One of the things that's different is that, so if I take a look, for example, at Cosmic, this is one of 10 million block plugins. But so this is a settings screen that allows me to turn off the blocks in Cosmic itself, and I can disable these here. But this is a settings screen that only shows for administrators. So you could give your client an editor account, which is something I always like to promote instead of giving the full-on admin access. And then they wouldn't be able to do this. So WordPress isn't yet up to what all of the block manager plugins are doing themselves, but it's a step forward, and it's something that probably will be on the radar coming soon. A couple of other things, they've been doing a lot of really small changes that kind of seem minor. Things like, you'll notice that if you're very paying attention, that flies out, kind of animates a bit, things like that. They've cleaned up like some of these menus, like they animate a bit better, things like this. They're kind of small things, but they do go quite a far way, at least in my opinion, to make the experience feel a bit more professional. But they're kind of minor things, but they're nice. They've also focused a lot on performance. So it's something like multiple times faster Gutenberg in this version than it was before. So it should feel fast when you're like doing things in large posts like this one with like, this is what's called a like block unit test page, and it shows every single block and every single different combination, and it's great for theme authors. But something like this previously would have slowed down your Gutenberg instance a bit, but now it's like really, really fast. Like there's no like delay when I'm typing, it kind of just works. And so this has been one of like many, many improvements that they've been making to speed that are coming in WordPress 5.2. And that is the extent of the changes to Gutenberg. There are a couple of like minor features, minor enhancements, things like that. The main thing in both this release 5.2 and the previous release is setting the pathway for the future releases in phase 2 of stuff. But right now we're still getting kind of basic-y changes. Yes?
Okay, so how does it affect the advertising, the, integration of ads and
So that's an interesting thing that you might want to talk to Victor about, of how they're doing ads in different publications. But one of the things that Gutenberg lets you do is a lot of people would have previously, they would have auto-injecting ads, for instance, like every couple of paragraphs, and there are a bunch of plugins that do things like this. But what's a potential cool usage for Gutenberg is having plugins that have ads that have their own blocks. So you can set up a content area to put the ad exactly where you want it to go. If you want to take it a step farther, you can set up default templates in Gutenberg that say an ad has to go here and an ad has to go here. And you can let your writers write around that. And so that makes it so they know, oh, this is going to appear here, this is going to appear there. I can make this content a bit nicer. But Gutenberg itself doesn't really do anything for that. It's other plugins and ad plugins and things like that and custom development that will do that for you. WordPress won't do it out of the box yet. Yes?
Does Gutenberg handle programmable keys? In other words, the ability to do control something rather than have it do something?
How do you mean?
Shortcuts.
Oh, like that. So yeah, so there are a bunch of keyboard shortcuts. One of the difficult things about keyboard shortcuts, you can see here like the code editor I can activate with this, and I can bang up a list of all of the keyboard shortcuts. One of the difficult things with keyboard shortcuts is that the layout of keyboards is different in every single different, not in every, but in many different countries the keyboard layout is completely different. So I know that the Gutenberg team has been, at least with some of these different shortcuts, has been like, well, how do we do this so that it's accessible on certain keyboards? Like I think like the tilde key or something is something that's really easy on an American keyboard, but it doesn't show up in like half of the other like major languages. They just don't have that key on their keyboard. So things like that. And so there isn't yet a way non-programmatically to create custom keyboard bindings to different things like you would have in a traditional word processor. But I wouldn't be surprised to see that added in a custom plugin. There's probably already one that exists.
They don't let you choose your language.
They do let you choose your language, but WordPress, you can go into the settings and view all your languages, but WordPress doesn't yet have a mapping of the language to the keyboard layout.
Okay.
So that would need to be something
Way
that's...
to cut and paste stuff from Word. Is there an add-on into
It works out of the box. So if you copy and paste from a Word document, I know there were a number of different iterations at this and making this better. So if you copy from a Word document and paste, it tries to retain all the correct formatting without the like Microsoft Word specific stuff. So I don't think it'll use like the Microsoft Word font, but if you on purpose, but like it should pick up different things like different styles you've done in Microsoft Word, tables. Almost all of that stuff, as far as I'm aware, should work when you paste in. They have handlers for like Microsoft Word, for Google Docs, all those things. It should just work. Previously, like in older versions of WordPress, you would have that tiny MCE thing where you click that button and it's paste as Word. But this is now built into WordPress, so it should just work for you. Any other Gutenberg stuff?
Same thing with footnotes, with the hot links.
Footnotes is a plugin.
It's called that plugin.
No, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head the best Footnotes plugin to use. I'm using one, but it's a plugin. It's not something that is currently in WordPress. It is actually being looked at. There's an open ticket for it. I'm not on that. I have nothing to do with that. I'm just reporting the facts to you. Yes?
Tell me if it should be later, but in the transition from 4 point whatever to Gutenberg, I've looked at it on development site, test sites, for some existing ones, and every time I say, okay, take this page and convert the blocks, it creates nonsense block assignments.
Yeah.
And I'm a little leery of then converting the whole site, because nonsense I can deal with, but garbage
Yeah.
or broken scares the living daylights out of me.
Yeah.
How likely is garbage or broken?
So garbage or broken, I've seen a couple of things where if you click convert to blocks, you'll get pretty much a blank page. I haven't seen that in a while. But what's important to note is that if you activate Gutenberg, it won't do it automatically for you. Like you kind of hinted at, you have to go into the page and manually hit convert to blocks. So it's safe to install Gutenberg on a site, and for all new content that you write it using the block editor. And for all the old content, you don't even have to click the convert to blocks button. you can stay with the classic editor that has all your old stuff exactly how you put it, and you can keep on using that almost like for many, many years to come. So I wouldn't actually recommend installing it on a site and then going back and hitting convert to blocks and all the old posts and fixing them all up manually. That's hundreds of pages of content, and it's probably not worth it.
It's all backwards compatible.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Gutenberg is not going to be installed automatically when you upgrade us to the new one, right?
It is. So if you're on WordPress 4.9 or earlier, and you update to WordPress 5.0, which was in December, and any of the future things, Gutenberg will be activated automatically. But what you can do is you can install a plugin called the Classic Editor plugin. And so if you go into your WordPress install, and you go into Plugins and Add New, this is a beta install, so it has the beta testing tab first, but the feature tab will be first, and you can just click the Install Now button under the Classic Editor, and then you'll have the Classic Editor.
Which is what we've got now.
Exactly, that's what you have on any WordPress site before December.
Can't we just disable Gutenberg?
If you use the Classic Editor plugin, it'll do that for you. You'll have to install the plugin to do it. The Classic Editor plugin is going to be supported, I think it's until the end of 2022 is when they're currently saying. So at some point you'll probably need to upgrade, but this is if you need to plan it out, you can do it that way, but you should make a plan that by 2021 we want to upgrade our content.
So you can always uninstall Classic Editor,
Yes, yes.
and then you're good.
Exactly, then you're good. You're using Gutenberg. Yes.
But if you're on Classic Editor, you're not getting any upgrades, and how about your plugins? Or
So this is the very important distinction, is that if you stay on WordPress 4.9, do not do that under any circumstances. Do not stay on older versions of WordPress. If you don't want to use Gutenberg yet, which is understandable, but at some point you'll probably need to start thinking seriously about making the conversion. But if you don't want to do that yet, upgrade to the latest WordPress and install the Classic Editor plugin. If you stay on the older versions of WordPress, what's going to happen is that your plugins, they're going to be updating for 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and you're going to be over here on 4.9, and you're not going to be getting any updates, and you'll probably end up getting exposed to security vulnerabilities. Do not do that under any circumstances whatsoever.
Just one change,
Yes.
what you said, install the Classic Editor first.
Yeah, you can install it first is probably the better way to go. Though it should be safe, but who knows? It's the safer way to do
Does
it.
the Editor produce code in HTML that I can read? Normal, like I can read?
The Classic Editor does exactly what your WordPress install does today. Exactly that, like almost to the pixel. So if you're happy with WordPress now, when you install the Classic Editor, it'll be like that when you install the Classic Editor.
But I can't write any keyboard shortcuts.
Keyboard shortcuts, no. Talk to me after about keyboard shortcuts. I'm sure that we could find a plugin for you to do that. Okay. So that is kind of one of the biggest user-facing things is the Gutenberg changes that happen in WordPress 5.2. But another really cool thing that's been integrated into 5.2 is site health. And so if you've used the WordPress.org support forums recently, or you've talked to premium plugins are going to support that way, you might have been encouraged to install a plugin called Health Check. And so that's a plugin that gives you some information about your WordPress site, checks if things are working well, things like that. WordPress 5.2 integrates all of that into the WordPress dashboard directly. So this is WordPress 5.2, and this is telling me the site health of my demo site here is 72%. And it gives me a couple of interesting things for me to note. For instance, it's telling me that my PHP version requires an update, and it's linking me out to a site to do that. It's telling me that I have some inactive plugins that I should probably deactivate, or, uninstall if I'm actually not using them. The same with inactive themes. And it's also noticed that my site isn't using HTTPS. But there's a whole bunch of tests that I did pass. For instance, it's saying that, hey, your WordPress version is up to date. If you didn't have it up to date, it would scream at you. You need to update your WordPress. It's telling me that all my different server stuff is up to date, some different technical information. And this is stuff that you probably don't need to worry about, but if you see this flag as an issue, it means that, hey, you should probably email your host. WordPress is telling me that my site isn't working properly. Talk to your host, and they should be able to help you with that. A big one, especially with Gutenberg, is it tells me that the REST API is working and that I can perform something called loopback requests. Again, that's kind of like technical information, but if there are things here that are showing up in your site under critical issues that you don't know what they are, talk to your host, because there shouldn't be critical issues on a well-functioning WordPress site.
It
Yes?
doesn't monitor the core files for changes, does it?
No. So this is actually interesting. The health check plugin that this is based off of has a feature to compare all of the WordPress.org files, the actual core files, to the correct versions. Not all of the tools in the health check plugin were migrated in WordPress 5.2 into this, but that is something that might come into WordPress 5.2. So, or not WordPress 5.2, WordPress 5.3 or 5.4. That might be added at some point, that specific tool that's already been written. But when WordPress 5.2 comes out, you can install an update to that health check plugin that I mentioned. And I think that's also like on the first page of like plugins that you should install. And it'll give you that tool for you. So that is there already, this one, health check and troubleshooting. Yes?
Is there a hook that I can add my own health checks?
Yes. So this page is in, whoops. This page is extensible. No. Okay, so Jetpack is one of the plugins that have done this. I don't have Jetpack installed on this demo site. I was considering whether I should switch to a site that is, but this thing is fragile enough already. So let's leave it. But Jetpack, for instance, registered a custom test that looks through all of their configuration values and says whether Jetpack is working properly. So plugins can add information to this page. They can add their own tests. And so, for instance, the company that I work at, we have debug pages on all of our different products. And almost all the large WordPress plugins have their own. But it'll be nice to see all of this stuff getting into this one page and just one place for everything. Yes?
Earlier you were talking about PHP bump. Are you going to get into that? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry, Matt, I have a question. So is this to also like encourage people or discourage people from like polluting the notification system? Because like, is it
Not
to say-
exactly.
Okay, because you could be like, hey, you haven't properly configured your Google Analytics, but like, there's like a plugin, you sometimes install plugins and they like pollute, you know, with all, like a million notifications. And this, how do you, I guess like, I
That's
know you can
interesting.
discover the site health, right?
Yeah.
Like if this site health notification gets buried in pollution. Like,
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think that was an explicit design goal. I didn't see that on the ticket, but that's a really good point, is that plugins could use the site health page to add their tests in a more pleasing fashion when there is something like that falls into the idea of health that isn't right. So like probably like things like missing an API key or something like that is something that could be integrated into this, and I think it would be really interesting. I haven't seen any plugins doing something like that yet. Yes?
Like Yoast SEO, no. With all their warnings.
Those could be on here, yeah, definitely. I think if there are people who would do that, I think it would be them. They're pretty quick on the uptake with this stuff. Another thing in this tab here is site health info. This is like really technical information about your website. But what's helpful about this is there is a copy site info to clipboard button. And what this does is it goes through all of that information. It takes out anything that WordPress considers private, and it doesn't include that. And it'll generate this information that you can give to people when they're asking you for support. So if you email your theme company or your plugin company and they say like, hey, give me this information, you can safely click here and give me copy this site info and provide that to them. And it'll make the back and forth of where you're running this theme, this plugin much quicker. So it's a simple thing, but should make it a lot simpler. I know we've struggled with that in support.
So you said that this release fixed hundreds of bugs. I heard you say that.
For Gutenberg specifically, yeah.
Yeah. So are there still hundreds of bugs left?
There's more than 1,000 open issues in GitHub. There's like 2,000 core tickets or something that are open.
So should we be using this or should we wait?
You should be using it. The next feature that I want to talk about is related to the white screen of death problem. So what I've got here, I'm going to log out and hopefully this works. Yeah. It's funny saying I hope this works and you get a white screen. That is what I wanted to happen. But so right now here I've got a site that's saying this is a white screen, something went wrong, maybe I updated a plugin, I changed a setting, my host changed something, and I go to my WordPress website, and I get this, which is entirely unhelpful. What's new in WordPress 5.2, let me enable the feature. It's enabled by default, but I wanted to show you the white screen for dramatic effect.
Is that a website?
Yeah, that's the website.
It's very interesting.
It's a fast read.
Yeah, you can get there pretty quickly. But so this gives me a slightly prettier page, but it's still not super useful. But what I did get is WordPress emailed me. So WordPress emailed me and told me, howdy, your site recently crashed and may not be working as expected. And it's telling me that this was caused by the demo plugin that I have set up, and that I have a link that I can click below, which will initiate something called recovery mode, and it will help me fix this problem.
Oh, nice.
That's nice.
So when I click on this link, it brings me to my WordPress dashboard, and it says recovery mode has been initialized. Please log in to continue. So I'm going to log into my website. And it says, you're in recovery mode. And this means that there's been an error with a theme or a plugin. When you're ready to exit recovery mode, you can either log out or you can click this big orange button. But interestingly, it's also telling me about this notice here. It's saying one or more plugins failed to load properly. And so now I can go to the plugin screen, and WordPress has automatically paused this plugin so that I'm able to use my WordPress site and it's working. And so this means that now I can deactivate this plugin. And now, hopefully,
Very nice.
when I log out, the site is working. And I can log in again, and the site is working. And so I've been able to, quote unquote, repair my WordPress site without having to go into FTP, without having to go into my hosting admin, delete files, complain to my host or whatever. WordPress should just take care of it all for you when you click on that link. Yes?
One obvious question, it said this link expires in 4 hours.
Mhm.
What if you didn't see it in time?
If you go to another page that generates an error, so let's say you try and log in again, it'll send you a new email. The reason for that is we don't want to send you an email every single time the error happens, because you can wake up to an inbox that has 500 messages from WordPress telling you that your site is broken, and that's almost as unhelpful as not having the feature in the first place. So what WordPress will do is WordPress will wait, and they'll only send it every couple of hours. But if you go to the site and you try and log in again, you'll get a new email immediately. And maybe this will happen, probably will happen. WordPress is still in development. But we might be changing so that if you click this link and you click it and it's expired, it'll send you a new email immediately too. So the email might expire, but you can get a new one pretty much instantly.
Now, that email was independent of the change you made in that code, false to true, right?
Not exactly. So this is my WP config file, and this is a bit of code that's saying disable the fatal error handler. It's enabled by default. So what the fatal error handler is it finds that error and it sends this email. You can disable this feature entirely by setting that constant. So they're pretty much essentially the same feature altogether. So they're not disconnected.
Who gets it?
So this gets sent, that's a good question. This gets sent to, let me pull up the setting. So there's a lot that went into this feature of that question exactly. So unfortunately, this right now is not separately changeable. Well, kind of is, I'll show you how. But it goes to the site admin email address. So if you go to settings general, you put that email address there, and that's where the email is going to go to. In the future, something that we want to add is to be able to make it go to a specific user. So you could go to that page and you could say, hey, send the email to my administrator email address. But there wasn't a way to do that securely fast enough for the page, for the WordPress 5.2 release. So that's not there yet, but it might be happening in the future. One more thing, you can change this. You can set a little bit of code in your WP config file as well and change the email address like that. So if you are managing sites for clients and you don't want the client to get this email because maybe this admin email goes to contact@ngo.org, you can set a constant in your WP config file to change that to go to your developer email address. And so the developer gets that email and not someone who has no idea what to do with it. Yes.
And if you wanted to, you could send it to something like a Google group so multiple people could see it?
Yeah, you can send it to any email. There is a filter that fires, and that will let you customize the whole thing. So you can send it to multiple emails, you can change the content, you could send it to a completely different place. It's somewhat extensible in that way, so you definitely could send it to a Google group like that. Yes?
A couple questions. When you trigger recovery mode, does that happen on the front end too? So other people start seeing your site and some...
Recovery mode is per browser session. So what actually happened here is that when I clicked on this link, WordPress set a cookie on my computer, and only my computer. And so only I am in WordPress recovery mode. So the rest of your website would be unaffected. In this demo that I had here, the front end of my site, and you kind of saw this when I was showing like from the bakery post and things like this, is that the front end of the site always worked. The only time when the fatal error happened was when I was going to the login.php page. So the reason it works this way is for security reasons. If let's say you have a security plugin that's malfunctioning on the security page, on the WP login page, you don't want the whole world to be able to get into your WP login page without your security plugin active. So it only happens for you. So everyone else in the world will be seeing the regular version of your website whatsoever. It's only when you deactivate the plugin that it's deactivated for everyone.
So that's pretty crazy that it can tell you what's crashing your site.
Yeah.
Usually it takes hundreds of hours and a lot of time to do that. But was it always that easy to pinpoint what's crashing?
So it's, this is interesting. So it does a couple of different things. I'm debating how much of the technical information I want to go into. But so what's happening is that it's looking at the actual PHP error that happened, and it's back tracing to figure out which plugin it came from, and then it's pausing that plugin. And then WordPress redirects multiple times in a row to catch multiple plugins that are causing fatal errors all at once. So to the user, it should happen pretty much instantly. You should log in and it'll show you the plugins that are paused. It's not super, super, super sophisticated. For instance, if you have a plugin that provides a hook or a filter and another plugin misuses that hook or filter, it will end up deactivating the plugin providing the hook and filter. It'll kind of show you in that documentation. If you go into the WordPress admin there, you'll see the stack trace, and if you're the advanced user, you'll be able to tell that. The improving which plugins are detected as showing a problem is something that we do plan on addressing more in the 5.3 roadmap, but right now it's in the middle level of basic versus like super advanced. It's pretty good for I think like 95% of the use cases, but it's not perfect. It's for plugins and themes. So if it figures out that your theme is doing it, it will pause the theme. You'll have to then switch to a different theme. It will give you, so one of the design goals is this is explicitly not an error logging solution. So it won't print out all the logs on every single page and all the information. It'll show you a little bit of that. It'll show you like the stack trace, but that's it. So it doesn't currently say like, hey, on this page it caused this error over here, over here, over here. That's something still that I think either will never come to WordPress core from what people more smart than me have said, and it's probably something that is more for hosts to still do, to actually do the whole error tracking. So it does the basics, but it's not catching every error on every page the user was doing this.
Last question. What's
Sure.
your plugin of death?
It's just a PHP file that
Can I see this,
calls
the
an
code on
invalid
the
function.
PHP file? Can you show again?
This?
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. But yeah, it's just a plugin that on login init calls a function that doesn't exist and it blows the site up.
And that's coming in 5.2, right?
Yep. Yep.
Nice.
Yes.
I'm sorry, how many sites in the world use WordPress?
33% of the top, is it 10 million? Victor, you were on the marketing team at one point, weren't you?
Yeah, what's up? Sorry.
33% of the top 10 million websites use WordPress, something like
Yeah, I
that?
think we're at 33.
Yeah. So 3.3 million of the top 10 websites, and then the super long tail of tens of other millions. Yes?
I promise related to this. So for VR and AR and all this new stuff, because I'm creating that kind of content too, so,
Mhm.
and I'm just trying to keep creating more different stuff and not just one thing. Is there support for that?
VR and AR?
Yeah, for the content?
There was a WordCamp talk in New York City about that. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is PHP general stuff. One of the things that happened, let me find a page.
What was the word?
It was a mangle of words that came out of my mouth. PHP general stuff. Because I'm going to talk about two things. One is plugin requirements in WordPress. So right now, most WordPress plugins work they're really old PHP versions. Something that's new in WordPress 5.2 is for plugins to say which PHP version they require. The reason that you should care about this is that it'll now show in your WordPress dashboard when there is a plugin that requires a PHP version that is higher than what you currently have. So for instance, this is the WP Session Manager plugin, and it was updated to require a new version of PHP. If I updated this plugin on WordPress 5.1, my site would crash. On WordPress 5.2, it's going to block you and it's going to say, hey, the newest version, it doesn't work with your PHP version. Don't update it. You can't even update it. It will stop you completely. And it will also stop you from installing plugins that require a PHP version that doesn't work for you. So if you're on an older version, which we'll touch on in a second, if you're on an older version, your site should break in less instances from trying out new plugins and new themes, things like that. Because they should be able to tell you right away, hey, this isn't going to work. Any questions on that?
But one plugin requires the highest version, one is the lowest version,
Yeah.
so it means you are in the...
You're somewhere in between, yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
But it's not telling you what it needs, though. if you click
No,
it.
it's not, which is kind of not exactly what you want. It shows it once you get into the dialog, but it doesn't show it there. So it says requires PHP version 7.1 or higher. But it doesn't, unfortunately, show you in here. I guess we're probably running out of room. It's probably a good thing. But yeah, for all of these things, if you go into view details, it will show you the requires PHP version right on the right. One of the things, though, that it does link to you is a page about updating PHP. So right now in WordPress 5.1, let me activate the plugin to make it show. Right now in WordPress 5.1, if you are using WordPress and you see this notice in your dashboard, it says PHP update required. That means that you're running on a version of PHP that is not supported in WordPress 5.2, and you won't be able to get any of this information. So if you're seeing this notice right now today, then what WordPress encourages you to do is to click on this link, and it gives you a whole bunch of information that you can take to your web host. If you are not seeing this widget currently, it means your website is up and ready to go. So when you go to WordPress 5.2, you won't have any issues. You're on a version of PHP that is good enough, and you should just be able to upgrade to 5.2 with no problems whatsoever. There's still that tool in Site Health that says, hey, my PHP version needs an update, because this website is on a PHP version called 5.6. And that was many, many years old. I think we were like at 4 years old at this point. So in the future, WordPress is going to bump the PHP requirements on your server to an even higher level. When that happens, WordPress is going to tell you about it. But you still have to contact your host and talk to them and say, hey, WordPress is telling me that I need PHP version whatever. How can we get this to happen? And if your host is good, they should be able to do that for you pretty easily. With any decent host right now, you should be able to get to PHP version 7.2 or even 7.3. You shouldn't have to pay for anything. You shouldn't have to go through any super enduring long support process. They should be able to take care of this for you. But what WordPress does give you is this page that is linked in a couple of different places that explains all of this about PHP and what it does, and gives you some information about what you should do before testing, and all of this kind of different things. And it even gives you like a sample email or whatever to send to your hosting company, hey, I want this, to get you to do that for you.
Where does it tell you what version you're on?
This is another of the funny things. So it says here, your PHP version requires an update, but it doesn't show it on this screen. You have to go over to the Info tab and go under Server, and then it says PHP version. So I'm on 5.6.20. So you have to hunt for it a little
Why
bit.
not on the dashboard? Does it tell you what version of WordPress you're on?
On WordPress, it shows it right down here. I'm using a development version, but it'll show you you're using WordPress 5. Whatever, and that should be on the bottom of your screen. It's also on this page, right there.
And those, sorry, are those notices only for admin?
Yes,
Okay.
it should be.
PHP version also needs some help.
Yeah, it should be in a bunch of places. Any other questions about PHP stuff?
Is it, who's, the responsible person for that update? Is it the service provider?
That's a good question. In my opinion, I would say it's your hosting company.
The hosting company, that's what, yeah.
I think they should be responsible for getting your website to the latest version of PHP. You might have to do some stuff. For instance, if you have a plugin that doesn't work, you might have to deactivate the plugin and you might have to find a new one. That's something that I would expect to maybe happen if you have a really old website that's using plugins that you installed 4 or 5 years ago. But if you're using new plugins and it's a completely newish site, you hopefully shouldn't run into too many issues. But I do think that it's something that the hosting company is in part responsible for, and they'll have to turn the switch anyway. In most cases, you're not going to be able to completely do it yourself unless you're using very basic like cPanel hosts. Yes?
I know there's some provisos, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning that WP Engine does offer a compatibility checker. It does throw false positives, so take all the results with a grain of salt, but it is a good rubric of things that may break your site if you update your PHP version without looking at those first.
I think it's compatibility checker.
Compatibility checker.
Yes, compatibility.
I'm sorry, yeah, that PHP compatibility. That's right.
The keyword search is not
So-
great. It could be just compatibility.
Compatibility was
change it?
misspelled, so we got confused.
One more time? Sorry.
Compatibility was misspelled, so
Oh, did I
it wasn't
misspell it?
finding it.
Is that right?
There you go.
There we go.
Go Jetpack or change it.
I don't know how to type without spell check.
It's one of all these people.
I know, it's horrible. Absolutely horrible. But yeah, so this is a decent plugin that Mervyn mentioned, and it will look at all of the files in my plugins and themes, and it will try and do a decent job of figuring out whether my plugins are compatible or not. There are false positives. If you see errors, what you should do is go to, it looks like almost all of these are compatible. Cosmic Block says 2 warnings. And these are things, this is the unfortunate thing, is these are warnings probably that the plugin shouldn't even be showing to you because they don't really matter. It's just being overly cautious. But if you see a plugin here that you're using that says, hey, this is not compatible, what you should do is email, if it's a premium plugin, email their support, or go into the WordPress.org support forums and open a ticket and say, hey, this plugin is saying that your plugin isn't compatible. Is it safe to update? Yes?
Is this good? So all these changes, would I have to do the PHP to every single one of our sites?
It will depend. So if you're on a like HostGator or SiteGround and you're on one of these sites where you have like 30 sites in your one account and it's in the same FTP, if that's all sounding familiar, then it's probably one update. But if they're different sites and they're different packages, you might have to update them one by one. It unfortunately is going to depend on your host. I would hope that if you're with a hosting company and you have 30, 40 sites, that they would be kind enough to update them for you instead of making you have to click the button and go to 40 different pages, but who knows? Yes?
I just wanted to mention that somewhere out there, there also is a very incomplete list of plugins that throw false positives to the PHP compatibility checker.
Yeah.
So your plugin might be on it. That's
There's-
like,
Timothy, the false positives you were talking about,
Mhm.
just let me make sure I got the definition. It's saying it's compatible when it's not,
No.
so it's a false negative. It's saying it's
Yes.
incompatible when it's compatible.
And one of the reasons for
Yes.
that, you just have to be careful and look at what it's actually saying, but one of the reasons for that is backwards compatibility.
Exactly.
Some of these plugins, some of these themes have the ability to work with previous versions of PHP, and this plugin may consider that to be an issue.
Exactly. Like I can say almost for certain, at least at one point, the plugin that I work on was listed as not compatible because we support all the way back to PHP 5.2. And so it's a false positive. There is that false positive list that I've seen that I'm not going to be able to Google, but that does exist and is a good thing to look at. And I think part of that's also been integrated into the plugin. So I know in some of the plugin it checks, like, I think for like WooCommerce and the main large plugins, it checks that, hey, this is something we know is compatible. Any other PHP questions? So the last thing that I want to touch on is testing this out. WordPress 5.2 RC, the release candidate, is supposed to launch tomorrow. And so that is the version of code that WordPress considers final, and that there shouldn't be any bugs. There will be bugs. But what you can do and play your part in this whole shebang is if you're using a hosting company that offers staging sites, or you have a local copy of your website, any of those different things, what I would highly encourage you to do is to copy your site into the staging environment, like WP Engine has this, Flywheel, all the main ones, and go into the WordPress plugins interface and search for WordPress beta testing. I think that's the name. The search is very finicky, yeah. The WordPress beta tester plugin. Don't do this on your production site, don't do this on your live site, but do it on your staging site. Because if you activate this plugin and you go into beta testing here, it's going to, you want to select point release nightlies and then hit save, and then you'll be able to update to the RC version of WordPress. Now, so what happens is hundreds of people hopefully test, thousands of people test the release candidate version of WordPress. But if not enough people test the release candidate version of WordPress, when we update to WordPress 5.2, there are going to be bugs that aren't going to be caught. But we can all play our part by testing all of our sites and making sure that it works smoothly. And if you do find an issue, you can go to wordpress.org. You can go to support and then forums. And you'll see a forum called alpha and beta. And so there haven't been many posts recently, but when the WordPress 5.1 beta came about and the 5.0, this lights up with activity. And so with 5.2, starting tomorrow, there should hopefully be a bunch of posts in this forum from people who are reporting different bugs. And so if you find a bug when you're testing on your staging site, you should report it here. And so that means that the developers of WordPress will be able to take a look at it and hopefully fix it before WordPress 5.2 comes out at the end of this month. Any questions about anything that I've talked about today? Awesome. Update to WordPress 5.2, people.
Thank you.